so French. I don't know why. It's getting worse.
That's nothing new for you, Maha.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hey, Samuel.
How are you guys doing?
Good.
Pretty
Doing
well.
well. Some of you more or less, some of you down, good. Well, I hope there's more going up than going down. I see Alan very, very thin. I hope you are eating. Hi, Maha, now I see you there. How about Derek and Jennifer? I don't see your faces now.
Hello.
And JP and me.
Hello.
I see.
Hello. Hello. You cut your hair? Okay.
Yeah, I did.
Good. That's brave to do in the houses. Hey, we need to do it by ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, and Jamie, you told me that you have to leave soon today, and for those who have TOK presentations, again, you may want to leave at 4, but I'm going to explain a little bit. I sent the agenda for today. We want to split the class in 2. So for those who are staying after 4, this is not totally related with the topics of the syllabus, but we want to discuss a little bit what's going on in the world. So I prepare a presentation more related with recession, but then again, it's going to be recorded. Actually, this is actually being recorded right now. So good. So how about starting? I have a recorded session that lasts for 1 hour. What I want to do is to share it with you. And if you have questions related with what we are seeing in the screen, please don't hesitate to just interrupt and just raise your hand, and we can just make it an interactive session. Sounds good? It's already pre-recorded, it's already submitted in the webpage. So if you want to go later to that session, you can do it later. Maha, you want to add something or you're fine?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's share the screen and let's start with that as soon as possible so we can use the best of the time right now. Where is it? Let me see. I think it's this one. Uh-oh. I think it's this one. Let's check. No. Sorry, guys. Just need to make sure which one is it. Launch meeting. Okay. Okay, I think I got it now. Share screen, share computer. This is the one. Okay, let's go through it. And then if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. About inflation. Today is 23 of April. And we are going to start talking about the difference between real and nominal figures, okay? Maria, can you hear? So to start talking about that, which is related also with the concept of inflation, let's go back with a basic concept that is tied with the idea of the circular flow of the economy. So if you remember, we were talking about how there's a real flow, which is the factors of production on the one side, and then the goods and services produced by the companies back to the houses. And this is the real flow because we're talking about in-kind process and goods and services and factors, okay? But we said that in a market economy, we have money to make the transactions more dynamic. So we have this financial flow or the monetary flow. So if we think about these two flows, then we can just put them here as in the image is telling us. So let's think about everything that the economy produces. So it's actually all the goods and services that an economy produces over a certain period of time. And we're talking about everything, okay? We're talking about Coca-Colas, and we're talking also about cars, but also we're talking about education and maybe flowers and food. Everything that the country produces will be the real flow of income. But then we have, on the other hand, the money that the country needs to make the interactions or the transactions in a market-based system. So we have actually the amount of money that a country has should match in a certain amount to what the country produce, okay? So it's going to be a little bit more complicated to explain the details about how the money is being created and how much money should be circulating in an economy. That's not really, not even the purpose of this class, but Maria, you had a question?
Maja was saying in the chat, like, can we make it like a full screen, please?
Okay, yeah, let me see if I can do it from here. Okay, I need to stop sharing and let's do it. Okay. Give me 1 sec. Oh, give me just 1 second because I need to share with the audio. Okay. Yeah. There we go. Also, is not something that we need to study right now. Later in the university, you may have a financial and a money topic that it takes 6 months to understand more the process. But just to simplify it, we have here the amount of money in circulation that has to be issued by a certain institution, okay? So it's not just anyone that can print money and just put it in circulation. The institution that is in charge of issuing money or injecting money into circulation is the central bank of a country, okay? We call it the central bank. Sometimes it's called the public bank. Very unlikely to call it in general, but we call it central banks. And in the USA, it's also called the Fed, okay? So the Federal Bureau of Credit and Money. Some countries actually call it also the board, the monetary board. But we will refer it as the central bank of a country. The central bank is a public institution. It's usually comprised of different members of different stakeholders in the economy. Sometimes it's the Minister of Economics, the Minister of Finance, some other delegates from the government. They include usually a representative from the business sector, a representative from the unions. So it's a board comprised of many members that they take technical decisions. And I mean technical decisions because they have a focus and they have a mandate. The amount of money in circulation should be technically matching the amount of goods and services that the economy is producing, okay? So later we will talk a little bit more about political economy and actually what is the goal of issuing more or less money. But we may say in a very simplistic and superficial way right now, but it's important to understand it, is that the amount of money in circulation should be matching with the amount of goods and services. And also, if the economy is producing more, then the money issued should also be increasing, or there should be more money in circulation. If the economy is producing less for some reasons, the economy is contracting, then the money in circulation should also be contracted at a certain level, so we don't have more money in circulation than what the economy is really producing. The difference between that is important because if we are thinking about, let's say, a country that it just prints money, it just wants to print more money and more money and more money. So more money is printed and issued in a country, but the amount of goods and services is not really increasing. What we will see is that the prices of these goods and services are going to be higher. So now you have $2 or $3 that are backing up just one Coca-Cola, instead of $1 backing up one Coca-Cola. I'm simplifying the idea, but just so we know, so we see visually how it works. If there's more money in circulation, then the Coca-Cola will be backed up by more money. So that means that inflation will take place. In other words, the value or the price of each good produced is going to be having more monetary value. Okay, there's a question from Alan, so please go.
But Samuel, how do you get the money in the first place?
Good question.
Yeah.
Totally, that was the question I was thinking that you were having in your mind right now. So actually, how do you get the money from the first place? The central bank, as I just defined it, is the one that prints money in a country, and they actually will issue money via private banks. So the way that we call it open market operations. Actually, we will talk about that later next year anyways, but just to answer your question. an open market operation will mean the central bank lends money to the private banks, and the private banks will in turn lend money to the firms or to the consumers who would need that money to consume or to produce goods and services. So actually the process is starting from the central bank. The central bank is the one that creates money, puts it in circulation, and that's where the money is actually flowing, where it's coming from. I hope that answers your question in a very basic way so far. Later we will go deeper, but that will be next year.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, can I ask a question about inflation?
Yes, go ahead.
Can you repeat the explanation for inflation? I don't know if I completely got it.
Sure, I haven't even defined it. We're going to define it in a couple of slides more, but I just want to understand the concept behind inflation. And the concept in this context is more money in circulation than the amount of goods that are being produced.
Okay.
So as long as we have that in mind, later we will define it in a more technical way in a couple of slides.
Okay, thanks.
Actually, the concept that we will talk about inflation a little bit later on today. So once we have this in mind and we see how the money has to be matching with the trends of the real economy, then we can move on to talk a little bit about all the policies related with inflation and all the policies related with recessions and trying to increase the production of an economy, if that is the case. Let's see this idea, prices change over time. So what do you think about this? Prices decrease over time, prices increase over time. What we are definitely saying is that prices are not stable over time. So usually we think that prices increase over time. There are different reasons why that happens. One of the reasons is that resources become more limited and more goods are being produced. So that means that there's more pressure on the prices of the goods because the factors of production are actually used at its full capacity. That's one reason. But there are other reasons that we may think why prices changes over time. And we will explore that in detail when we go to the concept of inflation a little bit more deeper next year. Let's see what this slide is telling us. So let's look at the information that I retrieved actually from a web page from the USA showing the prices of cornflakes, just this product, okay? In 1943, 11 ounces of cornflakes was 8 cents. But then in the 88, what you can see here as the years go by, the same amount has been changing in prices, okay? Some years have been keeping stable, but usually what we see is that the prices have been increasing. Well, we have here a decrease in the price, which is unusual. Then it went up again. Now we have the same price here in 2004, but now we have less amount. So actually the presentation is less, but the price remains the same. So that means that the cost or the price of this good is actually increasing as well because now you are receiving less with the same amount of money. Here the prices remain stable between 2004 and 2008. But if we look at 2020, we may find that this price has increased, okay? So in general, what I wanted to portray with this slide is that prices overall of all goods and services, in general, in average, if we put here time and we have here prices, they will actually show upward trend, okay? So prices keep increasing over time. There's going to be a delta or a proportional change that is positive. Of course, there are fluctuations some years, as we have seen here. Sometimes goes down, sometimes go up higher. Sorry, but in general, prices go up. So let's define inflation. Inflation can be defined as a sustained increase in the general price level. Make sure that you have this in mind. We're talking about all the price level of the economy, not just cornflakes. So we're talking about cornflakes and flowers and cars and universities and everything that a country produces. In general, in average, the prices of all these goods have do increase. That is what we call inflation. What is one of the consequences of inflation? That as long as the income remains fixed. Let's just put that as a cause of one of the problems. If the income is not matching up with the increase of the prices, then we have a situation that the purchasing power of money is less. So in other words, actually, you are going to be needing to pay more for the same amount of goods. That is one of the consequences of inflation. Need to pay more money with the same amount of goods. But also now let's go back to this idea. If your income is remaining the same and you have to pay more for the amount of goods, then that means that you have to work more hours to actually buy the same amount of goods. Unless your income is matched with the same increase of the price level of the economy. If your income is matched with the same increase of the price level, then that means that you are actually earning in proportion the same amount that you need to buy more goods and services. Now, at the end of the day, still the purchasing power of each dollar or each unit of monetary currency that we're talking loses its value, because now you need 2 or you need 3 to buy the package of cornflakes, or to buy the car that you need to buy, or to buy the gasoline that you need to buy. Now the purchase power of the currency is lower because the prices have gone up. Inflation is generally measured from one year to the next year. So when we are talking from a timeline, we are talking about inflation taking place from the former year, 2018, to 2019 to 2020. So the inflation rate is usually measured from one year to the next one. It's very unlikely that we see, oh, the inflation rate from 1990 to 2020. Well, we don't really use that as the inflation concept. We use the inflation concept as from the last period of time compared to the new period of time. So that's what we really read when we read a newspaper or any information that is given to us. If it says the inflation rate is 3%, oh, we're assuming that it's 3% from the last year, okay? Unless it said otherwise. Some countries actually are very good in having statistics, and they capture the increase or the change in prices from month to month, okay? Sometimes it's from quarter to quarter, so every 3 months, they measure the price level and they see, oh, inflation is changing or is increasing by, let's say, 2%, 1% from the first quarter to the second quarter, etc. Okay? Now, how to measure inflation is something that we need to explore, and we will explore using the concept of the Consumer Price Index, and the other concept is the GDP deflator. I'm gonna pause here to see if there's any questions so far. No, let's move on. Different indexes that actually they mean almost the same, but we are going to be differentiating one to the other, and those are important tools to understand in order to measure the price level changing over time, and therefore finding if a country is facing inflation. Sorry. Let's define the concept of nominal and real. Now that we know that inflation is making some noise in the measurement of whatever goods and services we are comparing over time, now we can talk about nominal and real. When I say noise, that means that if the cornflakes that we were talking about, let's use the example of the cornflakes package. They say if a country over time is producing 20 boxes of cornflakes each year, then we see that the country is really producing the same amount each year. It's not producing more, it's just producing the same amount. So T1, T2, T3, each year they are producing 20 boxes, okay? So their production is not changing, okay? However, what if we take into consideration the prices? Because remember that when we measure GDP or something related with the production, we multiply prices times quantity. So here we're talking about the quantity. But what if the prices have been changing over time? Remember we said In a certain year, the cornflakes box was 18 cents, but then the next year was $1, and the next year was $1.50, and the next year was $2.99. Then it went down, but it went to go up. So actually what we're looking at here is that if we multiply the price times the quantity, we will have a certain value. So this is saying price each year of cornflakes. So if we are now looking at the prices increasing, then we have a situation that is telling us, well, actually, we didn't produce, well, we produced 20 boxes, but when we multiply the 20 boxes by the price of that year, it's giving us a certain information that this year we produced, let's say, $290. And the next year we produced maybe, again, 20 boxes, but with the inflated prices or the higher prices, it will tell us, oh, we produced $300 of cornflakes. And the next year, oh, we produced $370 of cornflakes. But in real terms, we were producing only 20 boxes. What is actually inflating the value is the change in prices. So the inflation is actually giving us a wrong information about the real production of, in this case, cornflakes. If we don't use cornflakes, but we use everything that the economy is producing, then we have the same situation. If the real production, remember the GDP from the output is remaining stable, but the inflation of the country is reflecting higher prices, then we have a value of the GDP that is not considering the real production, but is considering the production plus the change in prices. Yes, Alan, please go ahead.
What will be in the y-axis and what is on the x-axis?
Good. Because I was just trying to visualize what I'm saying, on the x-axis, I'm just putting time. So how over time, and I call it T1, T2, mentioning, periods of time, which could be years. And on the y-axis, what I'm putting here are different things. For example, I started with a black line saying this is the real production of the country. But then I said, if we multiply the production times the price, then the y-axis will be in monetary terms telling us the production plus the price or times the price. This will be how much each box of cornflakes times the amount of cornflakes are reflected. So I'm just not using a model. I'm just trying to visualize what I'm saying when we, in order to explain the noise that inflation is making when we incorporate the inflation in the production each year. So even if we're producing the same amount, inflation is creating a wrong value. Now you got it, yeah?
Yeah.
So please don't use it as a model. I'm just trying to put my voice in a graph here in the slides.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So we call this the nominal GDP. Nominal GDP means the GDP measured on each year prices, or measuring the GDP at the current year prices. Remember, the prices of each year could be higher than the prices of the last year. So now we have nominal GDP of each year, okay? So in terms of comparing the GDP over time, the nominal GDP is not the best comparison figure because the nominal is already including the inflation rate. Unless we have the inflation rate, and we know that, okay, we have 3%, 5%, 2%, whatever the increase in prices, unless we have that information, then the nominal GDP is not really telling us the real production of an economy. And we actually, as economists, we want to understand if the economy is producing more or is producing less. We don't really, well, we care, but we don't really care if we want to measure the production of an economy. We don't care about the prices, or actually the prices are making us noise over time. It doesn't really tell us the real story of producing more or less. So that's why we need to use some tools to subtract the inflation from the GDP, from the nominal GDP, okay? The nominal GDP, or GNP, takes already into consideration the inflation in its values, okay? It reflects already the increase in prices. So that's the nominal figure. So we need to convert the nominal figure into the real figure, okay? The real GDP. As you may be thinking right now, then the real GDP subtracts the inflation or takes away the noise or the influence in the value or in the figure of inflation. So when we talk about real values, we're talking about subtracting the inflation from that value. So we have real GDP, we have also real exports, for example, the real value of our exports. We have the real interest rate. Now we have the interest rate minus the inflation rate. Now we have a real interest rate. So all the monetary values over time, we want to subtract or to take away the inflation rate. So how to take away the inflation rate? We usually do something called, so how does that work? If we think or the influence in the value or in the figure of inflation. So when we talk about real values, we're talking about subtracting the inflation from that value. So we have real GDP, we have also real exports, for example, the real value of our exports. We have the real interest rate. Now we have the interest rate minus the inflation rate. Now we have a real interest rate. So all the monetary values over time, we want to subtract or to take away the inflation rate. So how to take away the inflation rate? We usually do something called a base year or a baseline index. So how does that work? If we think about a timeline, and let's say we have the year 2000 as our baseline. So we want to look at the prices of 2000 as fixed prices. Okay, we want to lock out the prices of this year. I'm using 2000 as an example. It could be any year, as long as we keep the prices of that year. So then we're gonna say, okay, in 2001, we produced X amount of GDP of goods and services, okay? But let's say again, using the concept of cornflakes, the idea, the examples. So the cornflakes, the 20 boxes that we produced, we're gonna multiply it not by the prices of 2001, but we're gonna multiply these boxes to the prices of 2000. We're gonna keep the prices fixed. And then the next year we do the same. And the next year we do the same. What are we doing actually? We want to maintain the production with a fixed price. So then we can compare each year if we are really producing more or really producing less because prices are remaining stable or remaining fixed. We are using what we call a fixed baseline year, okay? We are fixing our prices on a baseline year, and we are taking as a reference that year of prices of, in this case, cornflakes. But remember that in a country, we have cornflakes, we have toothpaste, we have books, we have what else? We can produce computers, we can produce pens and pencils, cars, everything that we are producing. We want to stock or to maintain the prices fixed to the base year. So if the year 2001 we produced 21 million of toothpaste and maybe 40 millions of books and maybe, I don't know, 40 computers and 10 whatever, Pepsi Cola. So, but then we are keeping the prices stable. And then what happens if the next year we produce 30 toothpaste and maybe 50 books? Because we are comparing it with a fixed price, now we're gonna be reflecting the amount that really is being produced with that fixed price. And now we can see if we produce it more or less from one year to the next one. We're gonna make an exercise in the next slide anyways. So that's why usually we say, for example, the real GDP of your country, let's think about Colombia, for example, real GDP of Colombia, using the baseline index of, let's say, maybe the year 2005, okay? Or this example was saying at 1995 baseline prices. So you will say the GDP, and then you put here 1995. So that means that the GDP of 2020, using the prices of 1995, will reflect a certain value, okay, whatever value we have. So let's say if in Colombia, the real GDP of the year 2019, let's say last year, reflected in prices of 2005, will give us a certain figure, okay? So the Colombian currency, and that will be the amount, maybe it's gonna be 2,050 million pesos. So using the prices of 2005, this is the amount of the GDP that we can say is the real GDP of Colombia based on the prices of 2005. And maybe in the year 2018, the GDP with the base year of 2005 was, maybe it was 220. Now we're saying based on the prices of 2005, this is what we produced. And the next year, this is what we produced. So now we can clearly see that Colombia produced more the next year compared to the former year, because we are now comparing the real production, because prices have been stabilized or kept fixed in a baseline year. So the baseline allows us to eliminate the effect of inflation. And every time that we see a real figure, or the real GDP, or the real interest rate, anything that has the word real, now we know that it's actually the value minus the inflation, or the inflation has been subtracted or taken away to eliminate actually that inflated effect. Look what this is happening in the USA. This is the average of prices changing over time since 1996 to 2016. Wow, now we can see here, using a baseline change, let's say in 1996, what these guys are doing is from 1996, how it has been increasing or decreasing. So some goods in general have been increasing a lot. Look at this, textbook and college tuition. So actually education has become really expensive over time. Childcare has been expensive over time. Food and beverage also, housing, all of that has been creating or putting pressure on the prices of goods overall in the country. So actually you as students, you will need to pay a lot more every year because the prices of college tuition keeps increasing. Now there are some goods and services that over time have decreased its prices, okay? Okay, I have two hands raised, so who wants to start? I don't see the names. Anyone?
Okay, yeah, I can go. I just wanted to ask if the reason for increase of price was related to what we had learned in micro. Like, is it the increase in demand or all the exogenous shock that we learned before, or is it another story?
Yes, thank you. That's good, because now we can relate the micro concepts. Remember that sometimes the demand outweighs the supply. So that is creating a pressure on certain resources and certain goods. Right now, what we just saw in the world is that the face masks, remember, and the alcohol gel, the demand was actually overtaking the supply. So actually you saw the prices of those products to go up. That is one reason why inflation takes place. But remember that we're not talking just about one good, but we're talking all the goods in the economy in general. In this particular example that I have here, many goods are actually increasing their prices over time in a high or rapid rate compared to others. That is actually creating the pressure overall in the economy. And the reason why textbooks and college tuition could be increasing, one of the reasons is the micro reason that you are mentioning, Maha. Like maybe, for example, there are more students willing to pay higher prices of universities compared to the amount of universities. That's making a pressure on the prices of education. Now, there could be another reason, or a couple more of reasons. One could be that the supply is shrinking. Okay, that could be something. There's less supply, let's say, of childcare. So that's again creating a pressure on the few people who are taking childcare because more women may be working and there's less people, men and women willing to provide childcare. That makes the childcare education or childcare to be more expensive. And there's another reason. Overall, the economy could also be facing a lack of resources because they import certain resources. So let's think about, which is not what's happening here, but let's think about oil. We need fuel for an economy to work. If the prices of oil in the world are increasing, then almost everything is going to be increasing in terms of cost of production. So we call it cost push inflation because now the cost of producing almost everything is more expensive. And in that case, you won't see a graph like this, but you will see everything that you see in this graph going upwards because now the transportation costs and the traveling costs and the production costs of anything, even electricity, is based on oil. If that is the case, then inflation will take place overall because of that shock of oil prices going up. What we see now is the opposite in the world. Now we should expect deflation, which is the opposite because now prices of oil have been decreasing, but that's something we may see in the next couple of months. I hope that answered your questions.
Can I ask one last one?
Yes.
Very quickly, like about inflation, you said it was general. So let's say like in this thing that we're seeing in the screen, the prices that go up and the prices that go down, let's say they even out, so that wouldn't be called inflation because there is no general price that go. I don't know if my question makes sense.
That makes sense. Yes, if this was the case, let's say if whatever is going down has the same weight of what is going up, then this country will not be facing inflation with one condition, and the condition will be how much people are consuming one good compared to the other goods. That's something we actually will review next year, but just to answer your question, which is very helpful, let's say that most of the population of your country consumes college tuition, but very few, just a small part of the population consumes TV. So in this case, inflation is going to be reflected more in this country because the percentage of population that consumes college tuition, which is the one that is increasing, is a higher percentage compared to the TV's consumption. And actually, when we measure inflation, we want to look at how much from this basket of goods, let's say if this is a basket of goods, then we want to see how much people consume from each of these goods. And then the more consumption in proportion of those goods, then that will weigh more because that's how households have been affected. Now, if the upward price and the downward price is the same amount, in this case, it's not the same. You can tell this is 200%, and this is almost maybe 70% of TVs. Now, if it was the same amount and those goods were consumed in the same proportion, let's say in average, then this country will not face any inflation. That would be a zero, but that's very unlikely. But that's theoretically speaking, that would be.
Thank you. It makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Is there any other question? I saw another hand raised. No. Let's move on. So TVs, for example, maybe the technological process of producing TVs makes each TV cheaper and cheaper to be produced. Maybe there's lots of competition that is actually making the prices to go down. So whatever reasons are making the prices of these goods to decrease over time is reflected in these blue lines. Overall, in the USA, what actually is making more pressure is the increase in prices in some goods compared to the decrease of the prices of some goods. So actually inflation is taking place. In average, the inflation in these 10 years that we are comparing here, 20 years that we're comparing here, has been 55%. So it weights more the upward prices of these goods than the downward prices of these other goods. Let's work on this small exercise. Now we know what the concept of nominal means. So in this table, this is telling us, okay, the nominal change of GDP compared to the last year is reflected on this column, okay? So that means that the GDP has been changing over time according to these values. Now I want to make a question for those who are here present. What would you say about the GDP increasing of this country when you see these figures from the nominal GDP rate of change? Anyone who would like to jump in?
That the country is producing more.
Thank you, Giovanni. Good. So we can say, well, this country actually is producing a lot more each year, 7%, 7.5. That's a very fast rate of growth. What is the noise that we may say that is not totally true?
Would come from the rise in prices.
Good. Because we are talking about the nominal GDP, we are including the rising prices here, and we don't really know how much that increase in prices over time is affecting that value of the nominal GDP change, isn't it? So now, what do you think is needed for us to deflate that rate of change? William, what would you say is a figure that you need to add here?
Well, we need the real GDP.
Good. Maybe we need to find the real GDP, and then if we have that, that is what we want to look when we see if the country is really growing or not. Now, if we don't know the real GDP, what other figure would you like to know if you want to find the real GDP growth? Maria, what would you say? Or William? Go ahead, William.
A base year?
Well, you can find the base year, but because you are just given the increase of the nominal GDP, what do you think could be useful for us to know in order to find the real GDP just in the rate of change? We don't know the absolute figure of the GDP, but we just want to know how much it has been changing over time. And again, we already know that this 7% includes a certain rate of inflation. We don't know that rate of inflation. What do we need to know in order to find the rate of change of the real GDP? Maria.
In price.
Me, yeah, thank you, Me. So we actually need to know the change in prices from the former year to this year, because this already includes the change in prices. But if we know the change in prices from one year to the next one, and we just take it away, then we will have the real GDP change. Does that make sense? I'm gonna play the video so we can see what I just said. It's gonna be repeated, but we will see the figures in the screen. Note that is the nominal GDP. So what story can you tell about this country increasing its GDP over time as it is shown here? You will say, oh, actually this country is growing 7%, 7.5. Wow, this country is really growing a lot. But what is the problem of saying that with these values? Well, it's not really growing unless we really know that the country is producing more. But what is the problem? This is just the nominal GDP. So the nominal includes the inflation rate. So maybe these figures are actually flawed because they are including the change of prices, because they are comparing the GDP of each year with the prices of each year. That's the concept of nominal. So if prices have been increasing over time also, this is not really reflecting the real growth of the economy. So what information do you like to have in order to deflate or to take away the noise of this nominal GDP change? Well, maybe you want to know the inflation rate. So let's say the inflation rate or the change in prices from the former year is reflected now in these figures. Now we have information to see the change in prices has increased and the change in nominal GDP has increased. Remember that the nominal GDP already includes this increase in the prices of each year. So what do you want to do in order to find the real GDP given this information? Well, from the nominal GDP, let's subtract the inflation rate or the change in prices, okay? If we subtract these values, then we have the real change of the economy production. So now, if you help me here, thinking about subtracting 7 minus 2, that would be 5. This will be again 5%. This will be what? 3%. 4%. 3. This is those 3 squares. 4%, sorry. 5%. 2%. So look at this last one. The prices in 1999 increased 4% in this economy, the general prices overall. But the nominal GDP increased 3%. Now, if we subtract actually this amount of nominal GDP minus the inflation rate, actually this economy didn't grow on that year. What actually is making us the noise is that this economy is facing higher inflation than the real production of GDP. If we think about a PPF and I ask you, well, draw the PPF of year 1995. You have information, you say capital goods, consumption goods. So in 1995, the PPF compared to 1994 did what? Increase, decrease? What do you think? Well, given the information that now we have there, we can say, oh, in 1995, the real GDP increased by 4%. So actually the PPF shifted out by 4%, okay? This is the increase of the real GDP. Now we produce 4% more capital and consumption goods, okay? What would happen in 1999? So if we were looking at capital goods, consumption goods, the nominal GDP, oh, the nominal was telling us, oh, the GDP was growing 3%. But remember that nominal over time is not a good way of comparing how much the country is growing, because we need to know if the prices were making some noise. So actually, when we take away the increase in prices, which was 4% compared to the last year, and the nominal GDP was telling us, oh, 3%, actually, the GDP of this country in real terms didn't increase. Inflation increased, but the GDP decreased. So actually we have a shift inwards of the PPF. This economy produced 1% less than the last year in terms of goods and services, because now we're looking at the real GDP change. Let's work on building a baseline, okay? Baseline index. Now let's look a little bit more on the mechanical way of measuring the index that we are gonna be comparing over time to measure. So we're in the half of the class now. We have half an hour remaining. I just want to wake you up if there's questions.
Sorry, someone. Is the real GDP the one like that kind of measures the growth of the economy of a country? Why would you need a nominal GDP?
That's a good question. Actually, when we measure the country's GDP each year, we can tell, well, this year we are producing a certain amount of money and goods and services. So for just looking at a particular year, how rich we are that particular year, that's what we are using the GDP for in nominal terms. But comparing it over time, then we need to deflate the nominal GDP. So GDP is easy to calculate it each year with the current prices, and that's why we have that figure, but comparing it over time is not useful. So it's not that we use it, but it's because we have it available each year. So if I show you a map, for example, of the GDP of the world, of each country on today's year, is useful because we're just looking at today's year. We're not comparing it to any other year. We're just saying right now the USA is richer than Mexico, for example, because they produce more than Mexico. Now, if we look at over time, then we can talk about how much more they are producing. But in absolute numbers, a country produces more than the other one, even if you're comparing current prices. Does that answer your question? Maria?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Good.
So,
Okay.
so would it be better for a country to be richer or to produce more? Like, is it better that your nominal or your real GDP increases?
Okay, that's another good question. Maybe the question, I will put it also to you guys to think a little bit and to reflect. Do you want your country to grow faster over time? Or do you want to be a rich country today? And actually, both questions could be related with actually what we saw at the beginning of this chapter by, remember the solo graph. If your country has plenty of resources, that means that you have a potential to grow a lot and become rich if you use those resources, let's say, in an efficient way, or if you start to produce money from those resources. Now, that means that some countries may grow faster than others. So if you compare two, let's say, two non-industrialized countries, let's talk about maybe Uganda and let's talk about El Salvador. Those countries may not be industrialized yet. They have plenty of factors of production. So you want to compare the rate of growth of these two countries to see, well, Uganda is doing something good because they are growing faster compared to the El Salvador, for example. So that you want to compare the rate of growth. But some countries may want to be comparing how rich they are today compared to other countries. So today, Uganda, or let's say maybe El Salvador is richer than Uganda today. So maybe Uganda is going to be richer in the future if they grow faster. But today, one country is richer than the other one. So it depends on how are you using these figures to compare the countries. That's what you want to use those, that data. Now, what is better? There's no answer to say it's better to grow faster or it's better to be richer, because that depends on the situation of each country and the current time. Now, if we add into this conversation the externalities that a fast-growing country may have, then we have a different conversation, because what we see, for example, China growing very fast, but they are polluting on the other hand a lot. So unless you change the way of growth, maybe it's not good to grow that fast if you are creating negative externalities. Some countries will say, well, maybe you want to create some restrictions on the production because that will maintain the clean water and clean air. So those countries are just growing slower, and maybe they are not as rich as other countries, but they have richer environment, for example. So just to add all these different conversations we have been having so far. I'm gonna move on with this technical. JP, you have a question.
Yeah, Samuel, I was wondering, how do you decide the base year that you're going to use to determine real GDP or GNP?
That's a good question. I forgot to mention that, and that's a very valid question at this point. The ones who decide the base year is the central bank, okay? Or the Fed, as we call it, this board of people. Now, they usually decide a baseline year every 10 years. So they want to keep actualizing the baseline year every 10 years, because can you imagine if we use the baseline year of 1950? Many goods of 1950 are not produced anymore. And there's a lot of technological changes. So the baseline year has to be updated every certain amount of time. And again, I'm telling you what usually happens is every 10 years, the central bank puts a new baseline index. Who does it and what is the criteria? That's a question I cannot answer because it's a technical criteria that they use. And again, I will say once they have set a certain base year, they will actualize it or update it every 10 years, depending on the country. I'm gonna add, maybe if you want after today's class, just for curiosity, if you go and Google the baseline index that your central bank is using to measure the inflation of your country, that would be interesting for you to know, because I bet that all the countries that are reflected in our classroom, they have a different baseline year today. I think Canada has been used at 2012, but I'm not sure if they updated it already. I'm not totally sure if anyone wants to Google out, but anyways, baseline years depends on the central bank of each country, and they will decide that year.
What about
Sorry,
like
go ahead, Maha.
Like, what about innovation? Because in this span of 10 years, new products are invented, right? So like, how do they use the first price or like it?
Totally true. And that's actually one of the flaws of using the consumer price index that we'll learn in the next couple of slides. Because let's say that one of the goods that the central bank is using as a benchmark to see the change of prices over time, let's say that is a cellular phone, okay? In the year 2000, when you were born, maybe you were not even born, the cellular phones were totally different than the mobile phones that you have now. actual cell phones were used just to make calls. And they even look like a calculator, like these all GDCs that you have. Those were the cellular phones at that time. Right now, when you buy a mobile phone, maybe you're not buying it to call anyone by phone. Maybe you're using it for taking pictures. So the big challenge for the central bank is to say, now how can we consider the mobile phones? Can we consider them and comparing it with cameras? Or can we compare them with computers because you have a computer in your pocket? Or we can compare them with phones, because then you want to see the change of the prices of cameras over time and the change of prices of computers over time. And technology is not allowing you to classify cellular phones as just one good. So that's one of the challenges, and we can actually mention it when we are answering that the flaws of using the CPI, which we will learn in a couple of minutes, is that some goods cannot be compared over time because of the technological changes. Also, the change of habits of people. Maybe before we used to breakfast cornflakes a lot, so cornflakes was one main good that we ate. But now we're eating more bagels instead of cornflakes, or fruit. I don't know. So then now the cornflakes does not weight as much as something that people consume more than fruits. So the central bank has to add the fruits in the basket of goods that they want to compare the prices and take out the cornflakes. You're gonna be answering that question a little bit later, but that's a very also good answer to say, yeah, technology makes a big problem to compare over time. Let's move on. So be ready, maybe you want to take a note, a piece of paper and a pen, because maybe we're gonna be making this exercise together, and you will have to do some calculations in the next couple of slides that I'm giving you actually a real exercise to work. This is what we call the baseline index. There was something in the chat, I think. Let me see. I cannot access the chat from here. Well, I should, but oh yeah.
I was just saying that Colombia used the baseline in year 2015.
Oh yeah, okay, excellent. Thank you, Alan. So there you go. It's very recent that they have updated their baseline. And if someone else wants to share your baseline, then you can see how some countries have different baseline indexes. I'm gonna move on. Let's go to this, if I can put play here. Yeah. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Go here. Okay. Sorry, guys. And sometimes my drawings is so bad because I'm learning to use like a board in the here, and it's not calibrated, so it's not because of my writing, but it's because of the technology I'm learning still. Let's work on building a baseline, okay? Baseline index. Now let's look a little bit more on the mechanical way of measuring the index that we are going to be comparing over time to measure if the prices have been changing or not. So we call it a baseline index when we refer to a certain baseline year, okay? In this simple example, I'm comparing the price of coffee in a coffee shop, coffee of 8 ounces, between 2000 and 2001 in US dollars. So take a look on this table. The type of coffee, they reflect certain prices on 1 year and the next year, okay? Some coffee has increased its price in 2001. Look at the cappuccinos and the lattes have increased. Maybe the milk is more expensive now, that is making the price of this type of coffee more expensive. The medium roasted coffee actually experienced a decrease in its price from the last year. Dark roasted increased its price, and the regular coffee also increased its price, okay? Now let's build a baseline index. So if we are told to use a certain year as a baseline year, that's the index that we want to use as our benchmark. So the baseline index, when we look at the concept of index, we are talking about a certain number that is going to be useful for us to compare over time and easy to compare over time. So usually our baseline indexes or indexes are based on the 100 or based on the unit. That means that the unit is our baseline, and how over time that unit is changing will give us a reflection of more than 1 or less than 1, or we can say more than 100 or less than 100 if we use, instead of the unit, we use a 100 value. So we want to convert always our baseline in the 100 value or the unit, okay? How do we do that? So in mathematics, it's very easy to convert anything towards the unit. So how are we going to be converting anything to a unit? Now, talking about prices, we're gonna be using the adding up of the average. We can use the average prices of coffee, or we can use the total prices of coffee. In this case, let's use the total prices of all coffees that we are selling in this coffee shop. $2 plus 150, etc. That will give us a value of 575. Okay, that's what I'm doing, is I'm just adding up all these different prices. Okay, we could use an average, but let's use the simple sum of everything that we are considering here as coffee. Because this is our baseline, we're saying that year 2000 will be considered now as our benchmark. Let's convert this 5.75 into the unit. How can we do that? In mathematics, everything that is divided by itself becomes the unit. Okay? So we just divide it. 575 divided by itself is 1. If we have 1 pencil divided by 1 pencil, we will become 1 unit. If we have 300 calculators divided by 300 calculators, will be 1 unit. So that's what we're doing when we're comparing our baseline, because we want to make the baseline the unit. Times 100, so we have our baseline index as a 100 base, okay? So in 2000, our baseline was 100, and now we know we divided the value into this amount. This amount is our baseline amount, or the baseline prices that we want to compare every year to. So let's do the same situation operation in 2001. Let's add up all these different prices. It gives us a value here of 5.95. Now we want to compare it to the baseline. So what are we comparing it? Okay, to the baseline price, which was 5.75. So let's divide it by 5.75. Now, what do you think? Is the baseline going to be more than the unit or less than the unit? Just looking at these numbers, 5.95 is bigger than 5.75. So we expect this to be a higher value, okay? So if we divide 5.95 divided by 5.75, it will be around 1.3. Let's see, 1.95 divided 1.75 is 1.03. Okay, so 1.03 is our baseline times 100. So we have 103 as our index in 2001. At this point, maybe you have realized that I made a little mistake in adding up this. This is 5.70 instead of 5.75. I'm gonna ignore the mistake. Actually, the IB, if this was an examination, will say, okay, as long as you're consistent with your mathematics, that's fine. So let's move on. The baseline changed from 100 to 103. So what this is telling us, the baseline is telling us, oh, prices of coffee overall changed by 3%, okay? From the 100 base, it changed 3 units, 3 points. So we can say that the prices have increased over time just looking at the baseline. If we have, let's say, more information, if we have the year 2002, and we have new prices of coffee, now let's say the milk became more expensive again. Maybe the price of cappuccino is $2.50, the price of lattes is $1.95. However, the roasted coffee keeps going down. And let's say the dark roast remained the same price, and the regular coffee went to 50 cents, okay? If we add up all these prices, 2.5 plus 1.95, overall, the prices of coffee are now 660, okay? Now we want to convert this into the baseline index. Again, we're gonna divide it by the baseline value, which we have established as our benchmark. So divided by 5.75, we're actually fixing this price as our baseline, as a fixed price to have the new index. So, wow, this has been increasing a lot. Now we see the difference. There's a discrepancy between the nominal and the baseline, or the index, or the prices that we were using as our baseline. So this is 660 divided by 5.75, 1.14 times 100, because we want to make it 100 base. So 114.7, okay? So from the baseline, we can say, oh, this increases 14 points, 14%. The price of coffee in overall in general increased by 14%. Now, if we want to compare the inflation rate of coffee between 1 year and the next year, then we want to use a different formula. We want to use the formula of the rate of change. And the formula of the rate of change will be using the new value minus the old value divided by the old value. 114, I'm going to use the absolute numbers, minus 103, not the absolute, but the rounded numbers, divided 103. Let's make it accurate. 115, because 114.7 is 115 minus 103 divided by 103. So how much is it in terms of change? Is, if I'm correct, 0.01. Let's make it again. 115 minus 103 divided by 103. Oh no, 1.11. 0.11. 0.11 is the rate of change times 100, because we want to look at the percentage change. So that means 11%. Prices of coffee increased by 11% between 2001 and 2002. And what are we actually using to compare that change of prices? We are using our baseline index of coffee, or our 100 base index of coffee. At this point, you may already have in mind, if we're not talking about just coffee, but if we're talking about all goods and services produced in the economy. So now we have a whole economy producing coffee and producing, again, maybe we have here flowers, maybe we have here shoes, again, we may have here meat. So maybe we have here what, fuel. So everything that is being produced and sold in the country has a certain price. And if we have the prices of each good, and we add up the prices, we have again our total amount of prices of each year in general. Now, can you imagine how difficult it will be to consider every price of every good sold in a particular year? That's a lot of effort and a lot of money. So what central banks do, they take a certain sample of goods. They say that's called the basket of goods that is representative of a certain population, and that will mean we're going to take those as the sample each year and compare how the prices of those goods are changing over time. In some countries, the sample is also geographically different. Think about in Vancouver, in Canada, there's a high proportion of Asian population. Maybe noodles are going to be consumed more. Maybe rice is going to be consumed more because of the Asian culture. compared to maybe Ontario. In Ontario, they may be eating more beef and meat, maybe more hot dogs. I'm just stereotyping here again, but we're trying to put certain consumption patterns that are more likely to happen in different parts of country. And then there's a basket that is regionally assigned by the central bank, and they want to compare that basket of goods, how it is changing in terms of price, and that's how they adopt the CPI or the consumer price index of a country related with a certain basket of goods, and how this index, which is now we're going to call it the consumer price index of the general prices of this basket of goods, how this price index has been changing over time. And that is how we can actually calculate inflation of a country. So what I just said is in this slide, we say the inflation can be measured using the CPI, Consumer Price Index, which is again a baseline index that has a base of 100 based on a particular year. The central bank is the one that determines that year. Some countries, this year is changing every 10 years. So right now, I may expect that for Canada, the baseline is the baseline 2010. Maybe they're going to change it next year to have a new baseline to compare the next 10 years. And then that's how it's usually used. Why? So this is what Alan was saying. In Colombia, the 2015 is used to calculate the CPI of the Colombian inflation rate, and they should update that in the future. Because if we keep using a baseline index that is too old, let's say 1940, okay, many goods don't exist anymore. Okay, we may not be producing the same goods. Maybe some companies do not exist anymore. Maybe the consumption habits have changed. So that's why we want to keep updating our baseline, and then from that, see how much has been changing the general prices of each year. That's the CPI, but also we have the other way of measuring, which is called the GDP deflator. We're going to talk about this in 1 second. The CPI has a base year line of 100, as we said. If CPI changes from T1 to T0, from T0 to T1 by this amount, now we can just say, oh, okay, we can say that the prices increased by 5%. Now, let's say the next year, the CPI is now 107. Is that the rate of inflation? No, this is the inflation actually using the baseline time, but we said that the inflation is actually measured from 1 year to the next one. So if we want to measure the rate of inflation, we want to use the former year, which is T1. So new minus old divided by old times 100, that will give you the inflation rate, okay? The change in prices, that's pi. We use pi to show inflation or to note inflation. So in this case, that would be the inflation rate of a country using the CPI as a way to calculate the rate of change of prices. CPI as a value is a stock, is a variable that we can say is an amount that every year can be added up, okay? However, inflation is a different concept. Inflation is a rate of change, is how the CPI is changing over time. So the inflation is gonna be giving us in a percentage value, and the CPI is gonna be giving us in a 100-based value, okay? Could be 110 or 107, whatever the value of the CPI is of each year, okay? However, the inflation rate is between years, okay? 7% or 2% of inflation between 2 years, using the CPI as the change of the stock value between one and the other year. So we have an example here again. If the price of basket, remember the basket or the sample of goods that the country is using, just a certain amount, in 1992 was 200,000, then the baseline year in this, if this was the baseline, in 1992, then the CPI will be 100 because we're dividing it by itself. But in 1993, let's say the price of the same basket of goods, the same sample of goods, now changed, okay? Now, this is the new prices of this toothpaste and cat food and whatever people are consuming on that year. That's the basket of goods. Now it's reflecting these new prices. Oh, now we see, okay, this is an interesting thing because the prices are showing us that now we have a different higher value of the same goods. So now we can divide this new price or this new value into the baseline value. That was the one that we decided to be 1992 in this example. So we just divide it and 100 times 100, now we have our CPI using the baseline of 1992 is 101.6, or we can say 102 if we round it to have the absolute numbers. So the CPI in 1993 is 102. This is the stock value, and this is again the CPI, this is a stock value. The rate of change between one and the next year, 2%. That would be the inflation rate or the flow value. Okay, it's a flow, it's a change. Let me finish today with the concept of GDP deflator. As a concept, is the same idea of deflating the numbers using the CPI, but yes, Alan.
So Samuel, I understand the inflation rate goes from one year to another, but the CPI stock compares the baseline with what?
Compares each index compared to the former index, but we are using a baseline to create a 100 index because we need to have a 100 coming from somewhere. And that 100 is telling us, okay, from this 100 value, we can start using the other year's indexes. So one year could be 110, the other year could be 112, maybe the other year is gonna be 98, but we are just comparing these absolute figures between years. So the baseline is the one that helps us to create the 100 figure. That year is the one that we are using as a benchmark, and then every year we're calculating, as we just did on the last slide, actually the CPI. So the stocks, or the stock value, we call it, the stock value is the CPI, and that's what we want to look at, how it is changing over time, okay?
Mm-hmm. So for example, the stock value of 2016, if there is an inflation of 3%, will be 103 if we compare with a baseline in 2015.
Yes, that's correct. If the last year was the 100 and then this year is 103, these two stock values, the 100 and the 103, they are telling us, oh, the inflation rate was 3%. Okay, that's a very simple. See, now just remember that we are saying the stock concept is just a concept that we have to have in mind when we think about stock. Means something that you can quantify right now and it's an absolute number. The stock of shoes that you have in your room, maybe you have 3 pairs of shoes, that's a stock value. When you say I am trading shoes, so when you are making a dynamic change, that's a flow value. Why is that important? Later we will see that we want to measure flow and we want to measure stock, and the graphs that we read make a difference depending on if we were looking at a stock value that is always absolute value in a particular year, or if we are looking at a graph that is showing us the rate of change. That's why I wanted to mention the difference between stock values and flow values, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Let's finish the last part of this presentation. Now we are using the total amount of goods and services produced in a year using the prices of a baseline year. So what we use is the nominal GDP of that year. Let's say in the year 2019, everything that is being produced has a certain value, okay? Maybe whatever value we have. That's the nominal value of the GDP. But we will divide this into the real GDP, meaning what we produced in 2019 using a baseline year. So let's assume that the baseline year in this country was 2005. So what is this telling us? The production of 2019 using the prices of 2005 will give us the real GDP of 2019 using the baseline of prices of 2005. So now we have the real GDP. If this value is smaller than the nominal GDP, now we see the discrepancy here is just the increase in prices. The nominal GDP is bigger than the real GDP. What is the difference? Actually, the inflation rate, isn't it? That is why we call the GDP deflator as the value that is telling us the discrepancy between nominal and real GDP. We can calculate the GDP deflator only at the end of the year, because at the end of the year is when we have this value of nominal GDP, because we know how much has been produced, and now we can just compare every single good produced using the prices of a certain baseline to compare it with the real GDP. We will multiply it by 100 because we want our GDP deflator to be using a base of 100. Okay, it's like the CPI. So now we have the GDP deflator. If the GDP deflator is using the 2005 baseline, so we expect that the GDP deflator in 2005 was the nominal GDP of 2005 divided by the real GDP of 2005 using 2005 as a baseline. So this should be given us the unit times 100. So the GDP deflator in 2005 was 100. Same concept of the CPI, but now we're using all the goods and services produced in the economy, not just a basket. And we are actually comparing the nominal versus the real, and that discrepancy is the GDP deflator, okay? So now we have here no discrepancy. There's a unit here. What if in 2019, the nominal GDP was higher than the real GDP? Then whatever value is this giving us, the GDP deflator now is telling us, now we have a discrepancy compared to the baseline year. There's certain change in the price level because the GDP deflator is bigger than the base year. And we use GDP deflator change over time to calculate inflation. But usually the most common value to be used is the CPI. It's cheaper and it's easier to find just a certain sample of goods. So now we have the formula of the real and nominal GDP using the GDP deflator. So I mean, we have the formula of the GDP deflator using the nominal and real GDP figures. You can read that. This is what we just explained. And this is the growth rate of the rate of change. Remember, new minus old divided by old times 100, we have a rate of change. So this is a percentage change over time of anything that we are comparing, okay? Could be CPI, CPI again, and CPI. So this will be an inflation rate. Could be GDP, again, GDP, and GDP. If we're using the real GDP values, then we're talking about the growth rate. So whatever we're measuring in terms of time is using this formula of growth rate or change rate, okay? And we have our last formula, which we will use in the next exercise, which is the formula of, no, it's the same thing. It's just the formula, but using GDP as a notation. CPI, if we use the CPI with minus the CPI, etc., now we have the inflation rate. And we have the GDP growth rate. If we want to use the formula of the deflator index, now we know the nominal values versus the real values will give us the deflator. If we multiply by 100, we have a 100 base deflator index. If we want to find the real GDP and we are given the deflator index already, well, we just divide the nominal divided by the deflator times 100. That will give us the real GDP, because now we are actually using the GDP deflator as the number to deflate the nominal GDP, and that will give us the real production of the economy, okay? So now we're talking about real GDP can be found if we are given already the GDP deflator and we have the nominal GDP, we're just dividing it, okay? Multiply by 100. Remember that this is important because the deflator has been provided also a number by 100. Let's work on this exercise. This is giving us information about nominal GDP in millions, and this is giving us already a GDP deflator. Okay, so I sent you this is a paper 3 question. I sent you by email. Right now, I will ask you to bear with me if you want to make the calculations. Otherwise, if you need to leave, then leave and make it as a homework, and then we can discuss the answers on email. But for those who can stay here for longer, please, let's look for it. I know it's a little bit blurry, but if you want to open your attachment, you can do it. This is giving us the nominal figures of each year and the GDP deflator of each year, okay? So they are asking you to calculate, in this particular case, the GDP, real GDP for the country, given these values on the years 2012 and 2013. So now the IB wants us to calculate the real GDP. Now we have this formula that we just talked about. Real GDP means nominal divided by the deflator times 100. So take 1 minute to calculate the GDP deflator for 2011. No, the real GDP for 2012, sorry, and the real GDP of 2013. This is what we need to fill in here, okay? Okay, I'm gonna pause it here and let's work on this. Let's use 2 minutes and then we'll see if we can share the answers, okay? There's a question, how many significant figures? Good question. When we are looking at the index, let's say the 100 base index, we want always to round it to the next absolute value. Okay, we don't use significant figures here. We just use the absolute values when we're talking about an index. So CPI and GDP deflator, always rounded to the next absolute figure. Now, when we're talking about GDP or we're talking about money, we use 2 decimal places, okay? 2 significant figures, or let's call it 2 decimal points because we're talking about cents, okay? Dollars and cents.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. If you are doing the first question, then you can, if you're done, you can go to the next one, which is once with the data that you have found, you want to calculate the economic growth of the country in 2013. So that's the change of real GDP between 1 year and the next one. It's gonna bring up a glass of water and come back in 30 seconds.
Quick, now's our chance for everyone to leave the meeting so that when he comes back, like, the meeting is ended. That'd be funny, hey?
Jeez Louise.
GP.
Okay. Good. So let's see, 1 minute has gone by. Maybe you are not done, but we're gonna move on. Declan, if you are done, do you have the answer for part C? So the real GDP of 2012 and the real GDP of 2013?
Yeah, for 2012, I got 5,311. I mean, that's in millions.
Okay. And the next year, I'm going to compare the answers in 1 second, but what else do you have?
5,407.
Okay. And let's see if Maria, do you have the answer of part 2, second question?
No, I'm just still doing the first one.
Still working the first one. Okay, anyone who has the second part just to compare answers?
I have 1.83%.
Okay, let's compare answers and let's see. The IB will reward you. If you made a mistake on calculating the first one, it's not a reward. Actually, you may lose 1 mark. But if you use this mistake and you have the correct mechanics for the second question, you will have it correct because that will it will be a follow-up with the mistake. Let's look. Pause it and in 1 second. Economic growth is not the number we have been produced. If we produce less, that's actually the contraction of an economy. Here's how it has been done. Not going to stop a lot. Okay, here are the answers. So I think that's correct. Declan, 53.10, and then the next year with 54.07. We are just dividing the nominal by the GDP deflator, and then we have the real GDP. You know, the mathematics may be not difficult, but we need to understand what we're doing. That's the type of papers that the IB wants in economics us to know. What are we actually finding? What is the reason why we are dividing the nominal versus the deflator? We should have been able to explain, or we should understand the mechanics, because that will give us the answer and that we can interpret the answer. And then, Mahad, you are correct. The rate of growth of this country is 1.82% because we're looking at the rate of change between the real GDP of 2013 compared to the last year. So remember, new minus old divided by old, and that would be the percentage change. Well, we need to multiply the 100. Any questions so far with this exercise?
In paper 3, do we need to know the formulas, or are they given to us in sort of paper?
Yeah, no, they will not give you, and they will not allow you to enter any formula. So that's why, and we use very few formulas like these ones. But as I'm telling you, the most important is to understand the concept. Remember the elasticities. We said, well, the rate of change or the percentage change in the quantity when there's a change in the price. Once you have that concept, then you should be able to recall it when you are calculating it. Same thing here. Then it's important for us to understand more the theory behind it, because that will lead us to the formula by ourselves. But we're not allowed to enter formulas. We are allowed to enter calculators. That we are. Let's move on here for the last 5 minutes here. A lot in the procedures because we have talked about that. But this is actually what we need to do in terms of calculating GDP and GNP. No, sorry, GDP real and GDP nominal and inflation rate or growth rate of a country. So that is given to us. If you were asked to calculate the inflation rate of a country using these values, what would you use? Okay, who would like to say I can calculate the inflation rate? So Alan, what numbers would you use to calculate the inflation rate between a couple of years of this country?
I will use the real GDP. No, actually the nominal GDP and the real GDP.
Okay, you can do that. You can actually calculate the real versus the nominal, and what you are going to be doing is actually dividing the nominal versus the real, and that will give you a value, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And that value will be actually the GDP deflator that we have here already. So when you are calculating inflation, you are calculating the change of prices between 1 year and the next year. So you can actually do a lot because you want to calculate the rate of growth of the real GDP and also the rate of growth of the nominal GDP, and then you subtract those, that will be the inflation rate. That could be a way of doing it, but it will take you more time. Now you can actually compare two two values here. If you're talking about the inflation, let's say between 2015 and 2014, can we calculate the inflation rate between these 2 years? Who would like to tell us how are you going to be doing that?
I'm not too sure, but do you just like subtract the GDP deflators? So that would be 1.23.
Okay.
Like rate of inflation.
Okay, good. And that's the correct answer, because now we have the GDP deflator as these values that are telling us how the prices have changed between 1 year and the next one. Okay. So in this case, we are actually using the formula of rate of change. Between these 2 years, we're just subtracting 100 minus 101, that will be 1% has the prices changing. Again, we can just subtract from the former year to find out the inflation rate. So once we're given the GDP deflator, should be easy for us to calculate the inflation rate, because it's just the difference between these two deflators that we have from 1 year to the next one, okay? Or you can go with Alan's proposal, which would be, let's calculate the nominal increase and let's calculate the real GDP increase. But that will take you more effort and more time to calculate these two increases, and then you subtract those to see the difference between the nominal rate of change versus the real rate of change. That would be the inflation rate. That should be the same number anyways. Let's move on. Well, now you have the GDP deflator. And we can call it, we can tell that it's 100 here, but it doesn't really matter because it's just telling us how much the deflator has changed over time between 1 year and the next one. We can clearly see that the deflator in 2011 was smaller, it increased, it increased, it increased, it increases. So we can clearly see that this country is facing inflation by just looking at the GDP deflator changing over time. If we want to calculate the rate of inflation, we need to make the formula of the rate of change using new deflator minus old deflator divided by old deflator times 100 to make it a rate of change in percentage. Now we have the inflation rates. We can calculate the growth rates. Now, calculating the change of nominal GDP over time is not really useful. Why? Because we already said that the nominal GDP is not really the best way of calculating or comparing a timeline. What can we say about this graph? The economy of the USA, how much really is growing between 2006, the first quarter, and 2006, the last quarter? Which value is more accurate, 4.96 or 2.38? Well, now we can say that the economy of the USA has been growing 2.38 in 2006 between these months, because now we're looking at the real GDP change, not the nominal GDP change that is already including inflation. If we subtract these two values, now we can have the inflation rate. Again, but this is the way that we are reading this type of graphs. We want to make sure that we consider the real GDP if we want to look at a country growing over time or contracting over time. Right now, in terms of recession, the real GDP of countries is actually starting to contract. The real production is not the nominal, but the real. I'm going to leave this graph here because we may talk about that later, but so you can analyze what was happening with these three countries, within these three countries, Romania, Netherlands, and Hungary. Look at what we're looking at here. Growth rate, or the rate of change of real GDP per person using the year 2000 of our baseline year. Okay, now we know that the real GDP is now measured here because they have stocked the prices in the year 2000. So a couple of questions for you to reflect. Which country is the richest country? Romania, Netherlands, or Hungary? Given this graph, can you tell? Who would like to answer that question? Which country from these three is richer?
You can't tell.
Good, why not, JP?
Because it only gives the percentage increase or decrease in GDP. So it doesn't give real monetary values.
Excellent, great question, 100%. You can just go to your home right now because you earned a 7 right now. So sure, we're just looking at the rate of change of GDP. We're not looking how in absolute numbers each country is producing. So again, we cannot tell if Romania is richer than the Netherlands. We're just telling how fast they are growing over time. No, the answer is no. I don't really know which one is richer than which other, because rich country means more GDP compared to the other one. Remember, the income of one country is bigger than the income of another country. So using the rate of change does not give us the information about how rich is a country. Now, this is actually telling us, if I ask you, is this which country is going faster? Now we can say overall in this amount of time, you can actually create a story about which country overall is growing faster. Now, maybe we can just look at a particular year. Let's say in 1995, which country was growing faster? Oh, now you can say, okay, 1995, the country grew compared to the last year. Romania grew 8.95 compared to the last year. Compared to Netherlands and compared to Hungary, they were growing almost maybe 2 or 3% compared to the last year. So Romania was growing faster. We don't know if it's richer, but we know that it was growing faster. The PPF was shifting in a bigger percentage than the other two countries. What happened in Romania in 1997? Oh, now we see the GDP decreased by 4.32%. They had a recession, okay? Whereas the other two countries were actually facing economic growth of, again, around 2, 4, 3, 5%. Okay, so now we can read these graphs. Now we know what these numbers mean, what these figures mean. Now we look at rate of change compared to the last year. Now we have a lot of information to analyze graphs, which we're going to be doing in the next following months. And I would like you to read the newspapers using these concepts to think about what's happening in the world's economy. I'm going to give you and leave you with this homework. Calculate different things that this is being asking you to do. If you want to add more columns here, just to add the nominal GDP, the real GDP, the real growth rate, nominal growth rate, inflation rate. Again, this is not useful, but it's useful for practicing calculating and then comparing the growth rate versus the nominal. We have different years. We have the prices of each year. We have the prices of the other goods produced. Assuming that this country only produces TVs and cars, now we can calculate the GDP of this country. Now we want to multiply the price times the quantity produced. Remember, for each year to have the nominal GDP of each year. And we want to use a baseline year to compare the GDP in real terms. So let's use, for simplicity, let's use the year 2000 as our baseline. Sorry, now I made a mistake because I can read here that it says take 2002 as the base year, okay? So ignore what I just said there. Let's use what is written in the task. So this is going to be your homework. Please work on this on the weekend. We're gonna give the answers next class, so next week. So please, if you can send me by email your homework before next class with the calculations of what is being asked here using 2002 as the baseline, okay? Not what I just said in the video. Baseline year, okay? So now you should know what to do. We want to use the prices of cars and TVs from using 2002. Okay, I should correct this for those who are not in the class. So this actually was our last slide before we moved. And let me just here.
2002 or 2000? I'm confused.
2002. Let's use 2002 as a baseline. Okay, is what is written in the slide.
How do we do for years previous to 2002?
Because you're using the same concept, because you're using, well, the prices of, let's say, 1999 or the GDP production of 1999 is going to be using the prices of 2000, okay, or 2002. Okay. So it doesn't really matter if it's before, you're still using the prices of a baseline to compare or to have fixed the prices on a certain year.
Okay.
Okay. Please,
Hi,
try to do it because that is not as common sense to use a year that is ahead and not the one that is older, that is earlier. But you will see when you are calculating, you will learn a lot because you're saying, okay, I'm just fixing the prices towards a certain baseline, and then I can see how the GDP is really reflecting the real production because we're maintaining the prices fixed. Alan.
Samuel, where can we find that PowerPoint?
Right now, I just posted it in the webpage. I send you the link in an email. And what I will do actually for simplicity, I will just send you that slide in an email that I'm following up after this class. Okay, so just a slide so you have the homework with you without looking at everything. Okay,
thanks.
Yeah, I just took note of that. Alan, you had a question.
I had the hand by mistake. It's fine.
Okay. Any other questions, guys? William.
When politicians and people in countries give speeches and they talk about how they like the GDP is growing so much and stuff, are they usually using the nominal or the actual one? And how can you tell? Or is there a way of knowing?
No, great question. You know what? What we may see is that because there's a lack of understanding of many people about what economics is and what actually these figures are about, there's a very likelihood that some politicians may even show the graphs of nominal GDP growing, and they may say, you know what, we are really in good shape because the economy is thriving. But if they don't really look at the real GDP, they are lying, okay? Now, because of course there are educated people in the audience also, you may say, well, who would like to take the risk of saying that in public? So that's why I think that's the importance of knowing about economics. We all should know about these basic things because then we can criticize whatever we read and whatever people say about the economy growing or etc. I have seen students from Pearson actually that have shown me articles. Remember the IAs? Your second IA has to be about macroeconomics. So I have seen students showing, this magazine or this newspaper is wrong because they are showing the GDP using the nominal GDP. And actually it's really wrong. This is not the way. And some journalists that they write the news, they may have it done by mistake or because they don't know. But we need to make sure that they are showing the real GDP. Usually in the academic papers, when you see GDP with a small number in below, then you know it's real because they are telling you which one is the baseline year that they are using. But in the newspaper, you don't see that very accurate. And what you would expect is that they are using the real GDP, and hopefully politicians use the real GDP. Otherwise, be very critical about any country that the politicians are telling you we are in good shape. Maybe you want to look at the inflation rate, calculate it, and see if that person is telling you lies or not. Mm-hmm. Any other questions or comments about this, what we have learned? Good. This has been a long class, and maybe I know it's a lot, and it's tiring just to listen at all of this, but I wanted to use the last minutes of the class. I know some of you wanted to make the yoga of China, but we have 10 minutes. I have having some requests about talking about the economy in the world. I wanted to go first with the theory because then we can make sense to have a more intelligent or more educated discussion about what's happening in the world. Tomorrow, for those who cannot stay for longer today, tomorrow there's this invitation that second years are having in the Zoom session with this economist that is actually in Canada. He's the economy senior and vice president of Scotiabank. So he has a very good position. I wanted him to be the president of Pearson College, and I asked him to apply, and he said, no, I'm good where I'm at right now, but he loves Pearson College. He was sitting once where you are, actually, not where you are right now, but he was sitting here learning economics. He was not my student because he's older than me, but he will share with us his studies and his perception and what Scotiabank is actually forecasting for the economy in the next, I would say, months and maybe in the next year. So it's going to be very useful for us to know from him directly for those who want to connect tomorrow at 3 p.m. If you have a class, then you can watch the video later. But if you want to prepare questions and you want to join, Then you have the Zoom session that I just sent with you. And yeah, come prepared to listen and to learn. Now that we have learned about GDP and inflation, I think it makes more sense that what he is going to be sharing with us and the graphs that he will share with us, hopefully you will be looking at them a little more with more understanding. Okay. Any other comments before we close this session, and then we can just keep talking very quickly with what's happening in the world. I just made a small PowerPoint presentation. I don't think it will take us more than 15 minutes to stay, but if you have questions afterwards, we can do that. I just want to close this officially, the IB class, for those who need to leave. We are done for today. Otherwise, then we stay for 1 minute, and you, unless there is another other question or comment. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Let me share you the screen that I have with this other presentation that I just made. I'm not gonna go through each slide very quickly, I'm not gonna stop a lot because it's a lot of slides, but I just want to show you, because Alan was asking me, let's talk a little bit, and actually Giovanni also asked me, what's happening with the oil prices? You know, what's going on in the world? You saw that this week, oil prices went down, 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 and it went even negative. We have a negative value of buying oil. What does that mean? That means that if you want to buy oil, if you wanted to buy oil at that time, the oil producers were going to be paying you money to buy their oil, which is interesting. Can you imagine? You will be buying 100, let's say, barrels of oil at a price of -$4 each barrel. So they will pay you $4 per barrel if you buy the oil from them. This is crazy. We have never seen something like that. Now, it has an explanation, and actually, that's actually what happened. If you are shocked to hear actually that is actually what happened. But there's an explanation why they wanted to pay people to take their oil out of their stocks, okay? So unless there are any other question, let me start with this, but do you have a particular question about the oil shock before I start? No. Okay, let's move on. I'm gonna show you a couple of graphs before we go to that situation. Look at this. This is the world consumption of oil and the world production of oil. Usually supply meets demand, as you can tell. So actually the supply is the blue line. And then sometimes there's more supply than demand, and that is what actually changes the prices of oil in the world, okay? So we have a stable supply of oil and a stable demand of oil until we reach 2020. What happened here? Look at this. This is a dramatic drop of demand of oil. Reasons for that, now we know. People were not consuming, the countries were locked down, production was paralyzed, traveling was actually stopped. So this was making the consumption of oil to be lowered, and then the production of oil remained stable. So there was overflowing of oil in the world. The countries producing oil, they were already producing the amount of oil that they were expecting to sell. But countries and firms and people were not buying oil. So we have a surplus of oil, okay? Let's move on. This is the forecast that actually they are expecting to have. This demand of oil may still be dropping until the mid of the year. And what the agency of environment agency, the energy agency in the USA, sorry, they are expecting the oil demand to start increasing until the end of this year, okay? So meeting again the supply. But between these months, there will be an overflow of oil that the producers of oil are not able to sell, okay? They should, what would you say? What would you do if you have an extra production of oil?
I will sell it really cheap.
Okay, you want to just get rid of it. Otherwise, what else would you do? Let's use common sense. If you are producing oil and nobody's buying it for you, what would you do?
You can store it for later.
Sure, that's what you would expect to do. Let's store it and let's sell it later. That is the problem, okay? That was a big problem. The storage capacity of countries was already full. So what we are looking at is that now countries who are producing oil, they have an overproduction of oil and they couldn't store it because they have their storage full. So what you can do is you can start building storage for your oversupply of oil. But then we have a situation of cost benefit. First of all, building storage of oil is very expensive. And if you want just to build it for a short term, then you will keep that storage of oil later and that will be a loss of money. So your opportunity cost here is about, should I build more storage for oil, or should I just get rid of my oil very quickly because I don't want to store it because I don't have where to store it? I can just throw it away, but it's difficult to just throw away oil, okay? So they were saying, if you want to take my oil, I will pay you because it's cheaper for me to pay you to take my oil from my hands than me building a storage of oil. That's the rationale behind the lower prices of oil and how it became a negative price, which is an interesting explanation. I have a couple of slides to explain it here. This is an interesting situation because we may say that before the COVID crisis, Saudi Arabia and Russia, they were actually having a price war. What they were doing is they were actually lowering the prices lower and lower and lower between Russia and Arabia Saudita, so Saudi Arabia to lower the prices. But that devastated the oil market. Venezuela was facing lower prices of oil because Russia was selling oil very cheap. And the USA, who is an exporter of oil now, they were facing also problems of lower prices of oil. So actually, when the COVID crisis came, and the prices were already low meaning $30 per barrel, more or less. $30 is okay. For some countries, the cost of producing a barrel of oil is about $12 in average. We may say more or less. So selling oil at $30 is still making profits for them. When it goes to 20 is when some countries get nervous. But when it goes below 12, that's when you say something is really wrong. We have never seen the price of oil going below $20, $25, less than $20. So now let's look at a couple of information here that is going to be useful. OPEC is the Organization of Petrol Exporting Countries. The 14 countries produce almost 80% of the oil in the world, okay? Sorry, this is down here. So they produce almost 40%, sorry, that's what I want to clarify this. Almost 40% of the oil production is produced by 14 countries, okay? This is OPEC. And the rest of the countries are non-OPEC, so they are not organized. So this organization of countries, they decide how much oil to release and how much oil not to release, and they have quite a big impact on the supply of oil of the world. So if the OPEC countries decide to cut the production of oil, the supply of oil will shrink and that will make the prices to go up, okay? Because they have a lot of control in this percentage of oil producing. However, now we see that there's a lot of countries that actually they can sell oil and manage also the prices if these countries are not strong enough. And if they cannot get an agreement, then there will be another competitor and they will start to compete via prices. So that's a very general idea. But we see also how this bump that we see here is what is making the problem of buying oil compared to what these countries were expecting to sell. OECD means the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development Countries. Let's say these are the industrialized countries. The dark green are industrialized countries. This is the rest of the world. Okay, let's move on. And this is just an explanation of OPEC. I'm just going to move quickly. Look at the storage of oil. So actually in January 2020, we may say because of the coronavirus, less demand made the countries to start to store and store and store oil, okay? This storage is what they wanted to sell, as soon as possible because maintaining the oil stored is expensive for countries to keep. So what this graph is just telling us is that they eventually, after the crisis, they will start to sell whatever they have stored so far, and that will make actually the release of oil eventually slower and slower until they get to the new normal, okay? So this is a short explanation. I'm just gonna summarize the short explanation of how the oil prices went to these negative values and what does that mean? What did that mean, okay? So now you can tell that the oil prices were having a really bad time. I think, yeah, I think later I will show you a little bit more about the current prices of oil today or yesterday. Any questions in general with the oil? I just want to have us the picture of what happened in the world.
I think this question is maybe for later, but like, what will be the consequences for countries like Saudi Arabia or Venezuela that their economy is based on oil production?
Good question. And let me just add a little bit more of information here. One thing that we have to have in mind is that the oil prices are actually negotiated for the future. So we call it future prices, okay? What does that mean? That if today you are buying oil, that means that you are buying the oil of the next couple of months. So right now, the price of oil that is being traded today is the price of the oil that you will receive or sell if you're a selling country in June, okay? So today you are trading the price of oil that you will be selling in June, thinking about Venezuela selling oil, okay? What happened on the last week on Tuesday was the last day of negotiating the future prices of oil that was going to be sold in May, okay? So they were selling the oil in May at a negative price. Today, the oil prices went up again to 13, 19, I think it's about $20 per barrel right now. So what is the consequence? If you are a country that you want to sell oil like Venezuela, you are selling oil and your country relies a lot on that oil revenue. Now that you are not receiving that revenue and you didn't know what to do with that oil, now you have a big problem. Actually, that's bad news for Venezuela, but Saudi Arabia and all these countries, the USA, if you can tell, Donald Trump actually who was reflecting the worry of oil producers in the USA, they say that the marginal cost of a barrel in the USA is about $12, okay? So that means that selling oil below $12 is making many oil producers in the USA to go to bankruptcy, okay? Or they have to have debt, okay? They have to repay that later. A country like Venezuela is gonna face a big problem because now they have overproduction of oil and still the prices of oil are not that good. You know, $20 per barrel is not good for Venezuela. I think Venezuela needs a benchmark a little bit higher to start making profits by selling its oil. Now, what happened with countries that are net importers of oil? Think about the countries that don't produce oil. We are gonna have benefits because now every country that bought oil very cheap, in May, you will find fuel really cheap, okay? If you want to stock up fuel now, which is not really the best idea to stock, but if you want to stock up fuel, you will find the fuel, the cheapest maybe in history is gonna be in May, around May, more or less. That will make all the economies of the world to have cheaper prices in general. Now, what is worth it? Because right now people are not going outside, people are not traveling. So actually this is a very strange situation. People will have fuel just standing up in their garage. Hopefully you don't want an accident there. So who knows, you know, we're just raising more questions than your answer, Giovanni, but now you have more things in mind. It's not good for Venezuela, the low prices. Let's talk very quickly about the stock market, okay? Because this is another layer of information that will help us to understand the big recession that is coming and is already hitting the world economy. What is the stock market? Very quickly, the stock market is where investors connect and buy investments. Remember, we made a little exercise in the classroom trying to sell, you know, those chips or those eggs, and this is what actually happens in the stock market. The brokers who are the representatives of people actually and firms, they sell and buy stocks, okay? This is a different concept of stocks than what we just talked in the other class session, okay? That's for clarification. So what are the stock market indexes? So when you see, for example, something called the NASDAQ, the Dow Jones, the New York Stock Exchange, or the Standard & Poor's, so these indexes are important indexes because they are reflecting a certain amount of firms who are issuing stocks, or let's say pieces of paper. Let's put it here as I'm putting here. The stock means a little piece of ownership of a company. So if you want to buy a stock from IBM or from Apple, then you buy the stock from Apple, you become a small owner of Apple. If you buy 1 million stocks or 1 million shares of Apple, you are actually owning a lot of, let's say, ownership of Apple. So usually what people do, they buy shares of different companies because they want to buy today and sell it later at a higher price, and they make money on that difference, okay? So how would you know if your company is, if a company is making money or not? So you have these different indexes. So for example, the NASDAQ index or the Dow Jones index, okay? Let me just show here. The Dow Jones, it takes the average of 30 of the biggest American companies. So we call it the blue chip stocks, those companies that are strong companies that usually don't fluctuate a lot, that you don't expect those companies to close because they are really big. Think about a company that you may have in mind right now that is a big American company. Who wants to share?
Walmart.
Walmart, that's part of the Dow Jones, by the way. What could be another one?
Apple.
Sorry, can you repeat?
Apple.
Apple is another one. That's part of the Dow Jones.
McDonald's.
General Motors.
McDonald's, General Motors, good, Shell Company, Coca-Cola. Okay, so those are the companies that we hear a lot, and they are big companies, and they are reflected in the Dow Jones. So it's 30 companies reflected in this index. So if you see the Dow Jones index going down, well, you have to be worried. Well, meaning that means that the value of those companies is falling. People are actually selling their stocks of these companies because they see that these companies may not be in good shape in the future. Do you want to be owner of a company that next year is going to be in bankruptcy? Of course not. Of course, we may say Coca-Cola may not be in bankruptcy, McDonald's may not be in bankruptcy, but the value of the shares may start to be lower and lower if you think that people are not consuming now more Coca-Colas, or if people are not going anymore to fast food restaurants. Maybe you want to buy shares of which company would you say is a good company to buy shares right now?
Uber Eats.
Sorry?
Uber Eats. Zoom, yeah.
Zoom, for example, yeah, there we go. Amazon. All these companies that nowadays are actually making money because people are buying online and using this. If you see actually the value of the shares of Zoom, I didn't see them, but I just heard that they went up very quick. Okay, now it's very expensive to buy shares of Zoom. Who would say 6 months ago? And people are actually selling stocks from other companies that they say, well, you know, these companies are not going to be having a good future. So again, maybe fast food restaurants, or even some companies that in the past were seen as stable companies. So that's the Dow Jones. The Standard & Poor's 500, as you can imagine, it takes an average of 500 big companies as well. So these are indexes that are telling us, okay, the value of the shares of these companies in average is increasing or is decreasing. Some companies inside the Standard & Poor's may be earning more value, but some companies are lowering the value. If the whole index is falling down, that means that it's going down more than what is going up in terms of the companies reflected here. NASDAQ is another one. The NASDAQ index, the difference between the NASDAQ and the other two is that this takes into consideration more technological or technology. I don't know. I would think that Zoom may be here because it's technology, but also there are also banks are related with NASDAQ. Biotech, for example, some companies related with biotechnologies are reflected in a NASDAQ. So all these indexes are reflecting the value of different companies. Sometimes some companies are here and also here. They are in different index as well, just to have in mind that. There's the FTSE. If you hear about the FTSE, that's the stock exchange in London. The FTSE or the FTSE is the 100 companies that are the biggest companies in London that are traded in the London Stock Exchange market. And then you have also the Nikkei that is in Japan, or the Germany Stock Index, the Chile and the Bovespa in Brazil, for example. Those are indexes of companies of these different countries. that are traded in those countries, okay? So if you want to look at the health of an economy in terms of producing goods and services, maybe you want to look at these indexes because these companies are telling us the more people buy shares from these companies, the more money they have to invest in expanding the company or investing in new technologies or hiring more people that are bright people to keep growing, for example. So that's what the people who are investing in the stock market do. If I have my, let's say, what I just did, just so you know, I had some stocks bought in Canada, but because I'm seeing a recession, I just sell everything. I just have the money with me. And if I have it in cash, it's even better, okay? I don't want to take the risk of these companies falling down and then I'm gonna be losing money in the future because I bought these shares 10 years ago at a certain price. Right now, I still can sell it at a higher price than what I bought it. But if I wait a lot, maybe the price of those shares are gonna go down and I will be losing money. So that's how people think about the investing in the stock market. If you see people selling and selling, you want to sell because eventually the price of those stocks will go down. Let me show you what happened here. Now that you know what this index means, look at this. Just between February and March, the stock index of these different Dow Jones, the FTSE and the Nikkei fall down in a very big proportion. Look at this. The value of the stocks of these companies went down in average about 30% just after the coronavirus. Why could that be? Let's think about reasons why people are not wanting to invest into these companies anymore, and maybe people are just selling their stocks from these companies. Why do you think the coronavirus is creating this panic of investors?
Because, as you said earlier, they're afraid that these companies may not be as well off after the crisis. Right now, they're not selling as much as they did before. So recovering might be harder and they might not be as successful and have as many profits as before, making the shares less expensive.
Excellent. Excellent, Maha. That's actually one of the reasons why, you know, investors are people like you and me, and they think the same way, and they have the same feelings. They have fear also of what they are going to be, what's going to happen in the future. And because the coronavirus crisis is totally new for everyone, and who would say that the whole world will be paralyzed? Nobody expected that to happen ever in their lifetime. So what you're seeing is that now the production and consumption of goods and services in general is stopped, okay? Maybe some biotechnology, maybe the health, maybe the mask producers and the producers of alcohol, you know, cleaning hands and vaccinations. Those are companies that you want to invest because you say, well, maybe in the next 6 months or 1 year, I would invest in a company that will make money by selling a vaccine to cure the coronavirus. Well, maybe that's the reason why some people are switching from Coca-Cola stocks to biotechnology companies, for example. So the fear actually makes people to sell stocks, and that's why the stock index goes down, because people are selling it as cheap as possible just to get rid of those values of those shares.
Samuel, I have a question. Like, when a company is making a lot of profit and is being like very successful, why do the price of the shares go up? Like, I don't understand. Is it because more and more people want to buy shares, or is it the actual profits of the company?
Yes, actually both are related, and that actually leads me to explain this concept of bull markets versus bear markets. So a bull market is when we see, for example, in this chart, the value of the shares going up, okay? So the question of Maha is why the values of the shares is going up when the company is making profits. So actually the reason why you want to invest in a company that is making profits is because you want to be part of that profit making, okay? So think about, if I ask you today, if you were to invest in a company, and I will give you 3 options, okay? One option is Facebook, the other option is Amazon, and the other option is Google, okay? Which company would you buy shares from? Facebook, from Amazon, from Google? I want to hear 3 different opinions.
I would buy shares from Facebook. Actually, Facebook or Amazon, I think.
Okay, Facebook and Amazon, and who else would buy from Amazon or Google or Facebook?
Google. 'Cause I saw that I was looking at the graphs and I saw that the Amazon stocks were going down like yesterday, which surprised me. So I would have thought I would have gotten Amazon, but not anymore.
Okay, interesting. And so the thinking that you're having right now in your head is actually why people buy from shares from a certain company. They may say, okay, I want to buy a share from a company that looks that is going to be growing in the future, that is going to be producing profits, because your shares could be different kind of shares. But let's say if you have a share that says that at the end of the year, they will give you a certain proportion of the profits. That's called dividends. So some shares that you buy could be bought with that condition. I buy that share and at the end of the year, I receive my proportion of my profits, okay, of the profit that that company is making. Most of the shares don't do that. Most of the shares, what they do is that the profits that they make is reinvested in the company to keep the company growing, okay? So what people do is they say, well, I will buy it today and I will wait maybe 20 years and then I will sell it, because when the company is so big, the value of my share is going to be so big that I will make a lot of money, because that company is going to be worth a lot. Now, if you see Amazon, for example, falling down and falling down, maybe you don't want to buy that share, but maybe yes. And that's the relationship with the bull and the bear market. So let me just define it. I'm going to come back to the answer of William, actually, which is an interesting answer. So we call the bull markets when the value of the shares is going up. So let's look at this graph. This is telling us how the market, I don't know which index was this, the Standard & Poor index, there we go. The S&P 500 index was going up between 2004 and 2008. When you see a trend, even if there are short-term fluctuations, when you see a trend, usually the stockbrokers, they say 3 months or 6 months, depending on how they are deciding. If you see the trend of the shares going up between that period of time, then you have what we call a bull market. Bull means that the shares are gaining value over time. So you buy today at, let's say, 200, and then you will be able to sell it in the next 6 months at 250. Okay, you are making money in a bull market. A bear market is the opposite. A bear market is when the economy is facing a downward slope. So the shares that you bought today, you will sell them later at a lower price. So you actually will be losing money if you sell it in a bear market. So what usually happens is that the stockbrokers, they use actually the money of other people. They don't use their own money. They will say, I want to buy when there's a bear market, because bear markets are actually telling me that the prices are going down, 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 down. So I can buy the shares very cheap now, and I will keep them maybe for 1, 2, 3, or 4 years until the market goes back and becomes a bull market. So bull markets are actually good when you are actually in the short term, but bear markets are good when you're thinking about the long term, because you buy now cheap and then you will sell it later after a couple of years when the economy goes back in track. Hopefully the economy goes back in track after COVID-19. We don't really know what's going to happen. Actually, that's for sure. We have many variables that are affecting the economies of the world. And another variable is also global warming. And another variable is actually the threat of political instability in the future. So I would rather take away my money from the stock market and have my cash with me than have a risk of saying I sell today and I buy later, or I keep my stocks and I will keep them until the market goes back in track, because I don't know what's going to happen in the next year or two. So going back to the answer of William, if you buy shares today of Amazon, maybe it's a good time because Amazon is a growing industry. Amazon may be still alive in the next couple of years or maybe more, because people are switching from physical buying to online buying. So maybe if it goes down today, maybe it's a good time to buy, okay? Because tomorrow those shares may go up very quickly. Who knows? And that's the thing. Nobody can tell you for sure what's going to happen. So now we have the concept of bull and bear. I'm trying to answer to Maha. When companies are making profits, that's when they start to get more value of these shares. and people want to buy them because they are solid companies. Okay, you don't want to buy a company that is actually falling down. I was surprised to hear JP saying Facebook, but maybe he's smart. Maybe he knows that Facebook is something that people will start to use again. But some people say, no, I don't use Facebook anymore. People use more other platforms. TikTok maybe is better than Facebook, or I don't know, these other things. But anyway, so stocks of Facebook may fall down. Maybe stocks of Amazon will go up. Who knows? So,
I'm going to be online now.
Yeah, I was investing in. I would.
Go ahead.
I think it's too late now.
JP?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, no, I thought you had a question, but it was the mic was on.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Jimmy and I were saying that if we had the chance, we should have invested in like Zoom or something.
Yeah, of course, that's what everybody says now. If I had, yeah. Now, still right now could be a good time to buy oil, because that's the other thing. You may buy oil and not have it in your house because you're just buying it in paper, you know? Now, the time when they deliver the oil to your place, that's going to be the problem. But if you buy today and sell that oil maybe next week, maybe you're going to be making money, because we expect the price of oil to maybe go up in the next couple of weeks. Many people, that's what they did. They say, okay, now is the time to buy oil really cheap. Even if I'm not going to get it, I will sell them the oil next week. Hopefully there's someone that is willing to buy it next week. But that's a different conversation, okay? Yeah, go ahead.
That's about the buys in UWC, because we're against oil consumption.
That's true. That's the thing, and I agree with you, Giovanni. I will take your comment very seriously, because we may say, you know, our values tell us that we should care about the environment. Well, actually, yes, we should take care about the environment. I wouldn't be buying shares from a company that is actually harming the environment. And maybe those companies are actually the ones that are making a lot of money right now. But then again, what weighs more, your willingness to have money in your pocket or your values? That's the big discussion and the big question about Homo economicus versus our values here at Pearson College. You're right, Giovanni. Let me just finish with these 2 slides. I have, I think, 2 or 3 slides just to finish with the idea so I don't bore you. If you are an investor, you want the best return of your investment. That's called ROI, okay, return of investment. Of course, you want to maximize your investment, okay? Let's think that people are still having some values, but they still want to increase their investment returns. So how do you increase your returns? You have different options. If you have right now $1,000, think about what JP just said. If you have the opportunity, let's say that you have $1,000, what can you do with the $1,000 in order to make more money in 1 year from now? You could actually buy some bonds, or you can put it in the savings account, okay? Bonds is a piece of paper that the governments will issue, and they will tell you, if you buy my piece of paper, I will give you back your money next year with a certain interest rate, okay? So usually bonds are a way of governments to take away money from circulation, or sometimes to fund the government programs, okay? Instead of taxes, they will say, I receive the money from you, I give you the bond, and next year I will pay you back your money with the bond with a certain interest rate. Now, that interest rate should be coming from taxpayers anyways. So you can actually put your money in the bank if you have $1,000, depending on what? Well, of course, depending on how much the bank is paying you as an interest rate. Let's say that the bank is paying you 1% of interest rate. Let's say that's the bank right now, okay? Now you can also buy stocks. So again, if the price of the stocks of the, let's say again, the 50 Standard & Poor's 500, sorry. If the stock market right now, you buy $1,000 in stocks of these companies, okay? And in 1 year, this value of these stocks are gonna be 1,500, you actually earned $500 just by putting your money buying the stocks. But right now is the opposite. Now you see that the value of stocks is going down. So nobody wants to buy stocks right now, okay? Depending on the stocks, maybe Zoom, but now Zoom is very expensive to buy. Who would like to then sell it next year? Who knows if Zoom is gonna break in the next 6 months? Nobody knows. Again, that's the uncertainty, that's the risk. The other way of receiving investment, return of investment is the dividends that you will receive. Let's say that you buy shares and you say, I'm gonna give you my $1,000, and at the end of the month, I want the dividends or the profits that your company is making as a proportion of the shares that I bought from you. So let's say that Disney World, Disney is making $1 million of profits. And to be simple, they issued 1 million shares and you bought one share, okay? So at the end of the year, you will receive your $1,000 back plus the profits that they are paying you back. So you actually made money by receiving the profits of that company. That's another way. Another way will be buying low and selling high, what we call it arbitrage in economics, okay? Buying oil today and selling high tomorrow. Buying commodities, let's say now the price of corn may be low, and in 6 months, the price of corn may go up. So I buy today corn and I sell my corn later in the stock market of commodities. Or buying gold, or even buying houses. Remember I showed you the price of the houses in the USA before. Maybe the price of houses today is cheap, and in next year is gonna be more expensive, okay? Well, anyways. So we can conclude that the investment of a people, of person, of anyone, is a function of the return of their investment, or these returns, times the risk, okay? Or the risk, plus the risk. Which is more risky from all of these options that I'm giving you? Putting your money in the bank, or buying the stock market, or receiving dividends from a company, or buying low and selling more expensive? What would you say is more risky?
I think the stock market.
Maybe the stock market right now. So people are actually getting out of the stock market and buying something different. That's why we may see the price of gold going up. It's fluctuating a lot, but in average is going up. Some people are buying Bitcoins. Remember the Bitcoin? So Bitcoin is just a currency that is online, and people are just buying today instead of buying the stocks because it's risky to buy stocks. Bitcoin is also risky, but is less risky right now than buying the stocks. So people actually change from the stock market to something more solid, less risky. Maybe people are starting to buy houses. That will drive the prices of houses up. Maybe people are starting to buy, I don't know, what do you think people buy? Silver could be another thing, okay? So just to have that in mind, because that's what we will see in the world happening right now. Stock markets crashing, but people buying alternatives to stock market, or just keeping their cash in their pockets. I'm just gonna skip this. To finalize, this is actually an interesting graph that we will learn next class, which is called the business cycle, okay? The business cycle is telling us the fluctuations of the GDP over time. When you see something like this, you see this big bump here. This is the Big Depression in 1933. The Big Depression of the USA is always seen as this big hole compared to the trend that the economy would have had. We see it actually like a W. I'm just gonna clear this for you to watch it more clear. So this W meant the economy crashed, and then it started to recover, and it crashed back again. And then it recovered back. And the recovery was really fast. Then here it was the 2008 recession. Now what we will see in the next couple of months, or maybe the next year, is that this was going up, but now we will see something like this. And it's gonna start to recover eventually, hopefully, and come back to the trend. This is what worries us right now. How long is this recession going to last? Some people say it's gonna be 1 year. Some others say it's going to be 2 years. Some people say it's going to be longer. Some people are going to be saying not less than 6 months. But this new recession is going to be way bigger than the one in 2007 and 8. This is where we are right now with the coronavirus in terms of the GDP decreasing. This is the USA GDP, but all economies in the world are going to be facing something like this. This was the Great Depression. It was 2008. This is what we will see. Colombia, Brazil, Guatemala, Morocco, all countries in the world are going to face this. I think I have the Yeah, we will talk in the next couple of classes how the governments react, and this is the stimulus package that we will call, that actually those are the policies that in economics we learn. Now, Trump was saying that he was going to help the US economy by giving some stimulus to the economy. So providing checks to people, providing credits to small firms, giving all this money for the economy to be stable and not facing a downward turn of the GDP. Well, he made this statement on the 17th of March. And remember, we said that the stock market went down, remember, with this. So after the 17th of March, and this is actually another news that we're saying Trump was signing this, that was on the 26th of March. So just that declarations of Donald Trump made the stock market to go up. Look, this is the 26th of March. It was falling down. This is the NASDAQ composite index that was falling down, stock market. But just because of the announcement of Donald Trump, it recovered, okay? And it has been recovering slowly over the last weeks, mainly because people believe that the economy is not going to be hurt, because that's why when you hear Donald Trump saying, we should get back to work as soon as possible. Let's go back to work. Let's liberate all the states, because they want the economy to be coming back on track. If this doesn't happen, we may see the stock market to collapse again. Yeah, let's just finish here with this slide. Yeah, this is a slide of what the IMF is projecting to happen in 2020. This is the GDP growth. Remember, we just learned about GDP growth in all regions of the world. So we're expecting a contraction of the economy everywhere in the world. Well, excepting China. Actually, China is the one that is helping here not to have a contraction, but to have a GDP increase of just 1%. Never in the world we saw something like that. Never in history we saw something that big happening. So that's why everybody is now fearful about, after coronavirus lockdown, the recession is gonna be really, really hitting us bad. Even in the college, we're not knowing if we're gonna open next year for you guys to come, because we don't know if people are gonna have money even to pay for the airplane tickets. So we don't really know if we're gonna keep making classes online. Then I should calibrate my smartboard so you can read my things here. So I'm gonna leave it here for now, so to ask questions.
So somewhat we can say that the recession is like the correlation is with the coronavirus, or like is coming because of coronavirus. So we can say that there are other factors that are influencing.
Good question. And actually we may say what triggered the recession was the coronavirus lockdown, okay? The main reason is because China, remember, China is the big hub of production of the world. China buys inputs from the rest of the world, produces goods and services, and then sells back to the rest of the world. If China stops consuming, the rest of the world cannot sell, because they were, and that's what happened with Wuhan. Wuhan stopped consuming for 2 months, almost 3 months. And then because of the lockdown, they were not even producing. So the other countries that were connected with China, they didn't have enough stocks to keep selling, stocks of anything, you know, stocks of materials or products. So they were also reducing their economy. So what actually triggered the whole recession was the coronavirus lockdown, not the people getting sick, but people staying at home. And the second one was people not traveling. Traveling is a big industry, you know, traveling and transportation. And the last thing that we may think is that already the economies were facing a GDP growth that was slower and slower, because we will see later that usually there are fluctuations that usually are normal in the economy. And in the past 10 years, we were growing overall in the world, but we were growing slower and slower and slower. So we were expecting a recession to come soon, but the coronavirus just made it happen very quickly, and it made it worse.
Well, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What are the implications of such a recession of such a huge scale on our everyday lives?
Yeah. So a couple of things that we may think right now in your houses. What's going to happen? First of all, you expect, hopefully, that your parents don't lose their job. That's the first thing that we need to look. Because once we start to see people that we know losing their job, that means that the recession is really hitting us, okay? Right now, we may think about some people losing their job, That's normal in, you know, a normal downturn, and then eventually they may get some benefits from the government, depending on the country, and then they get over it, and they find a job when the economy recovers. Right now, what we don't know is that if this going downwards will start firms to lay off workers in a huge scale. There's a joke that is a dark joke, but they say a recession is when your neighbor doesn't have a job, but depression is when you don't have a job. It's a, you know, playing with words, because when you get laid off, that means that you are not working anymore, and that means that actually your neighbor also doesn't have a job. When unemployment starts to rise very highly and the economy starts to fall down, then we have a big problem. Because the rationale here is that if people are not working, they don't have money to spend. And when they don't have money to spend, then other firms are going to start to lay off more workers. And that is what is creating a snowball of downwards depression, we call it, or a big recession. So what to expect in your own households? First of all, don't consume a lot. I would say let's get prepared, guys, because this is what's going to happen. We want to save money, because if our parents lose their job, then we need to just contract our expenditure, okay? In some countries, like Canada, we are receiving paychecks for people who are laid off. For example, you know, the people from the cafeteria, they were laid off because they don't have any work to do anyways. You are not here anymore. But the government of Canada is paying them $2,000 per month, only for the next 3 months, because Canada has money as a backup. They can even print money after a certain period of time without causing inflation, okay? Now, after 3 months, if they are not finding a job, then they will be in trouble, okay? Because they won't find a way of surviving, let's call it put it in those terms. So then that's when people start to use their savings. If you get out of your savings, then you start using your credit card. And when you have a big debt and you don't have savings and you don't have a job, that's when you want to be worried, because what are you going to be doing to pay back your debt? So that's why we need to be prepared. Be prepared meaning consume less, save money, try to help others that are actually, you know, facing we may say in some countries, people don't have money to buy even food. So let's try to help them to have some food stored. But what we would like to see is that the economy recovers very soon. So what else can you do? Let's start to find a business that can be creative enough for people to start working with you, or you making money instead of you working for someone else. If the company closes or shuts down, then you may start to use your, you know, entrepreneurial ideas to start making money. So how is this going to be affecting us? First of all, jobs. Second, we may find, well, the government's not finding enough money to keep paying for the services. So that will mean less social expenditure, or public education, public health may start to contract. And that is when the governments react, okay? We would expect that the governments will actually start doing something to recover, because we are gonna be facing what happened in 1930 in the world. And the experience in 1930 is that many people died because of that. Now we have that lesson learned. And there are policies that can be used for governments to start hiring people to prevent people dying. So I hope this doesn't, well, this does answer a little bit your question, Maha, but it's a little bit daunting. But again, we have to be realistic of what's happening. And actually, I don't see a optimistic forecast in the next 6 months, just to be very honest. And it's not only me, it's many opinions that we have been reading and sharing with other colleagues. 6 months at least is gonna be the first shock. We need to be prepared.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let me add a last thing here. Let's think about 2 things. One is that the reason we are staying at home is because of a health reason. So it's not something that is a political, you know, I don't know how to put it, a tantrum of anyone, but it's just because we need to keep safe, okay? So it's our life that is at risk if we get, not maybe yours, you're young, but many people is their life or death situation. So one of the things that we're looking at is as once the curve goes down, and hopefully a vaccination or a treatment is actually on its way to prevent people going to the intensive care, that will help a little bit to start the economy rolling back. But we don't see that happening soon. Hopefully there comes if in the next week there's something, treatment or vaccination coming, then everything that I just told you is not going to happen. But if that is not true, then the first thing is to stay at home, okay? Stay healthy. But the second thing I want to mention is about the, the response of governments towards this situation. We have a great opportunity, that's how I see it, to change the way that we have been doing things in the world, okay? If we are thinking, and this is my idealist part here that I want to share with you guys. If we always say, you know, we want to change the world, we want to change for a new future, we want to build green economies, we want to make the circular economy take place, we want to forget about the destruction of the environment, we want to redress all the extinctions, well, this is the time to do it. What else are we waiting for the world to happen if we want to change the structure of the economy of the world? Nothing else can be bigger than what we're facing right now. So maybe this is a good time to start thinking about how can we propose different ways of solving our economic problem. Maybe in a local way, you know, in small towns, we can start building small cooperatives of producing food and maybe not relying on Walmart, for example. Maybe we can start talking about building recycling factories to provide jobs to people. I know in Latin America, recycling is not really something that is a big thing. Maybe this is a good time to start investing in recycling factories in small towns and providing jobs to people. Maybe this is a good time to start changing, instead of relying on oil, maybe using solar panels to produce energy in small towns. So we're looking from local economies to start, you know, coming back to the cycle, but locally, not in general, as the GDP tells us, but in a very small scale, because that is more possible to do it. I think about even in Canada, that we think is an industrialized country. Think about a community like Mechosin. We all producing in a small scale and selling to each other. We can start creating a small economy that will help us to get out of the problem. And maybe in the future, we don't need any more Amazon, or we don't need any more Walmart. Same thing could happen in Prince Edward Island. Same thing could happen in your community in Morocco or in a small town in Peru. So this is the time to be creative, guys. I will say this is the time. You have to go to dinner. So all of you who need to go, that's fine. But I think this is a time that if we want to unite as a movement, this is the time to do it. This is the time to talk with our national committees and to talk with former students, because this is the time that we were waiting for to make a change in the world. That's how I would see it, as an opportunity. Otherwise, what are we waiting? That a meteorite comes to the earth? This is the meteorite. This is the time. So let's leave it here, guys. This is too much we have been talking, but I will leave it to you. Join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. if you want to join us and talk about this with Brett House from Scotiabank. And if you have any further comments, let's talk by email, because we have been connected for 3 hours now. Sounds good?
Yeah.
Gracias, Samuel.
Thanks, Samuel.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
Gracias, Samuel.
Okay, let's look at this as a good opportunity to change, guys. Bye-bye. See you later.
Don't forget to send us the link to the economic session tomorrow.
Sure, I will do right away.
Okay.
Nice hair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.